Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming back to yet another episode of 5 in 15, the HSAN Research Podcast. And today with me, I have two amazing people. And the first person is going to introduce herself right now, which is Anna-Sophie. Over to you, Anna-Sophie.
Hi, hello. My name is Dr. Anna-Sophie Jürgens. I'm from the Australian National Centre for the Public Awareness of Science. I study and explore science in popular culture and the cultural meanings of science, and indeed science and humour.
Amazing. And we've got our guest. Why don't we just throw it right to our guest of honor for today's episode. Tatiana, over to you, please.
Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. My name is Dr. Tatiana Bur. I'm a classicist. I'm part of the Centre for Classical Studies at the ANU.
Thanks so much for coming on, Tatiana and Anna-Sophie. Anna-Sophie, people might, if they have already listened to the episodes, other episodes have seen that Anna-Sophie was a guest. So, we're recruiting people and hosts left, right, and center. So that's fine. First question, you're lecturing classics at ANU and, your work focuses on ancient science and technology. So can you maybe tell us a bit about this research area and why you seem so passionate about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess classics, when you think of what classics is, studying ancient Greece and Rome, there are certain parts of that story that the public know really well, that maybe as like a young budding university student that you think you might know well already. And for me, I was really drawn to ancient science and tech because it was sort of a part of the Greek and Roman worlds that I hadn't encountered or that I hadn't kind of made up my mind about yet, right? I came with a blank canvas, and it's something that even still to this day, it's a fairly new field, especially the study of ancient technology. So I feel like there are just so many questions to ask and to answer, which is really exciting. There's lots left to do. I work as well at the interaction of science and tech with religion. Mm-hmm. And then it was kind of like a match made in heaven for me, in the sense that religion was the opposite. It was like this area that, Greek gods, Greek myths, Greek ritual was something that was like so iconic of the Greek and Roman worlds. And then I sort of I had a lot of fun putting those two things together. So that was my dissertation. That's my first book. And kind of unpacking the interactions between these subfields that I'm interested in, sort of unveiled a lot of what my own preconceptions were about science and about religion and how those fields interact in our own culture as well.
Fantastic. And I mean, who does not like a Greek god,
Tatiana, in general, would you say that humor plays a big role in your amazing academic field or fields?
Look, I think in general, in my subfield, probably not. But I think that's maybe largely because we, as I said, are kind of applying our own preconceptions of what we think these fields are. So we think maybe religion is something somber. We think that science is something serious. And actually, once you start to delve a little bit in antiquity, that doesn't really hold up. So even when you think of ancient religion, it has really playful, really funny, really ludic components. So a good example is something like the Great Dionysia, which was a festival in honor of the god Dionysus, this god of wine and of theatre. And within this multi-day affair where like people of the city would get together, stop working, engage in all of these rituals. But these rituals involved kind of lots of laughing, lots of drinking, and then, of course, there was performances and there was tragedies. As we all know, Greek tragedies, very serious stuff. But that was also paired up with comedies and with satyr play, which were meant to be really funny, were really funny. I still think they're funny when I read them. Hope my students agree. And so we get a kind of picture of religion itself as not entirely serious, and actually humour studies probably has a lot to bring to the study of ancient religion. And then in terms of science, this is something that is, as I said, like quite a fresh new research area. But one of the things that I'm really keen on working more on is precisely this idea of like the playfulness of ancient science, and specifically scientific demonstration. So I'll give you an example, maybe like the...
Oh yeah, please, that's great.
Ancient science is as a discipline, we've got to think that it encompasses things like philosophy, like natural philosophy, but then also the kind of areas that I look at more, like mechanics and pneumatics. Pneumatics is the study of basically running water, air, and steam. Right. And we get these amazing texts that are kind of like little IKEA manuals, how to make things using these principles. And in the introduction to one of these texts telling you, like, I'm going to explain to you what a void is and, how to use a siphon and things like that. But it sort of says, as the very first example, take a little vessel and stick it on your mouth and then suck out all the air. I mean, anyone who's done this knows that you just get stuck with this like little object on your mouth, right? Like, this is a pretty funny way to show a pretty important scientific principle, and it goes through lots of these texts. So yeah, I think the humor doesn't play a massive role. I think it could play a much bigger role, and I think there are exciting things to be done in this space for sure.
I mean, in full disclosure, I went to one of your amazing symposia last year, and I was just like, wow, I like a lot of the things you presented. I was really positively just mesmerized by. So yeah, I think good stuff. Maybe let's just then move on to the next question, now that we are already on this issue of science technology, and maybe taking a bit more to the public conception of it. So when you engage with science and ancient science and technology, so what would you say is perhaps a misconception that the public has of all of that, the field, or in general, something you might want to share here?
It's a great question. I think there are quite a few, actually. So I think on the one hand, when I tell people that I work on ancient tech, the first is a kind of disbelief, like, well, what do you even mean by that? I mean, tech is clearly our thing. It's the modern world's thing. There can't have been anything that was going on back then.
So shots fired from the IT bros and people
That's right. Yeah, the Silicon Valley coming down on me. So there's a bit of this kind of idea that pre-industrial societies don't have anything to bring to this discussion, on the one hand, right? That they didn't develop in any significant way. There's also the idea that if you're a slave society, that you didn't need to develop in any significant way because you just had slave labor to undertake all the tasks that then we develop tech for. I think there's we all can see that there are clear problems with that, right? Like, these assumptions rely on essentially a capitalist mindset where technology just fulfills one function, and that is to make to advance economically. And I think as soon as we actually realize that tech is used in so many different ways, and we allow room for that in our historical explorations, we sort of find that there was so much energy spent elsewhere. So not just, on the one hand, there's much more development than people acknowledge, and archaeologists in particular have done a really good job of showing that. But in what I do, it's also kind of acknowledgement that you can exert a lot of amazing technological effort on something that doesn't just advance your economy. And so a really good example is the Antikythera mechanism. So this was an object that was pulled out of a shipwreck in 1901, and people just didn't know what to do with it. And when they, as researchers came together and figured out what it was, they realized that it uses these precision gear wheels in order to model. Basically, it's an astronomical calculator and model. So you could use it for demonstration to show what planets, the 5 known planets of the time, and do. Or you could also use it as a predictor, right? Something to predict eclipses and things like that. And it uses these tiny, like 1 millimeter gear wheels. And so people suddenly went, oh, they did have the capacity to build these things. In fact, we have an archaeological object that proves that they did, but it was spent in order to basically create this little portable cosmos, as one scholar has called it. So yeah, I think that's sort of one preconception.
I could listen to you for hours. It's just basically describing a Game Boy there. It's fantastic. But again, we have only so much time, so I might just throw it over to Anna-Sophie for the next question.
Yeah, you already mentioned an example, and we would love to hear more examples, Tatiana. Can you tell us what's funny about ancient tech, if anything? I'm sure our listeners would love to hear a specific example from your research or background.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the, I think some of the fun and the playful and the ludic of ancient texts comes in these manuals that I've spoken about that are, they kind of I call them IKEA manuals because they describe to you how to make objects. And IKEA manuals are not funny, but when you that's right. They sort of depends through which lens you sort of read them. But yeah, so there are this sort of, I think that there is some playfulness in these objects because they're describing scientific principles that are quite complex. We think of self-moving, self-animated objects, and they're embedding them in sort of little demonstrations of how to make a bird whistle or a little animal drink or something like this. But we also get stories and stories, authors that we could term something like our very early science fiction authors. So someone like Lucian of Samosata, who was writing in the 2nd century of the Common Era, and who's writing these amazing texts, imagining the kinds of things that one could do, the kinds of journeys, astral journeys that one could go on if you could just clip on some wings and fly up to see the gods and what you would encounter there. So there's also a real playfulness and humor in the texts that describe objects like this, or stories about gods. That there's a story, for example, of a character called Salmoneus who decides that he's going to try and defy Zeus by imitating his thunder, and he does so by attaching some hides to the back of a chariot, and as he rides, they make this kind of clanging sound, and that's supposed to imitate the thunder of Zeus. This is essentially just using tech to be blasphemous, but also that's right.
Ancient deep fake. It's been around all. We knew it was. We knew it was happening. And with that, if that's okay, I might just take us to the last question, which is now. Here we go, listeners. Now here comes the big one that we kind of cooked up. So there's some talk recently. Maybe you have heard about that, Anna-Sophie, about the Roman Empire, and that men, for instance, would be thinking about this every day, or people in general, I guess. So can you confirm, as a classicist, that's actually true? Or perhaps people think about other things in classics, or just, confirm or deny, please. Or over to you, Tatiana.
I think I have to confirm, especially in our department, that we're constantly thinking about the Roman Empire. This was a real kind of shock, and it was good and bad news when we got this sort of what was it? It came from like social media, didn't it? Anyway, I think the idea is an interesting one for us because it means that there is something about classical antiquity that still kind of captures the attention of the general public. I think we should harness that, and we should sort of push people to think beyond just maybe Roman emperors and think about how much beautiful literature and, as we've said, like theatre and comedy and humour and science and all these other elements of antiquity that were also produced in Greece and Rome. But I think it's entertaining, at least, to think about this, for sure.
I mean, so bonus question then, if I may. So what do you think about every day?
I think far too much about these ancient IKEA manuals, don't I? I
think not enough. It's a matter of perspective, perhaps.
I think one of the things that I constantly think about, I've been at the ANU, I've been back in Australia working for like about 18 months now, and I'm really interested in how we can make Greek and Roman history part of a global history. So thinking also about how our own Indigenous histories are taught and side by side with Greece and Rome, and thinking about how our students are exposed to all sorts of different histories throughout their degrees and things like that. So that's one thing I think about, is sort of the place of Greece and Rome within other histories and within other cultural understandings.
Well, there you have it. It's perfectly fine, for a classicist of your stature. Amazing. Anna-Sophie, any last concluding remarks before we sign off? We have about a minute to go.
Well, I really think you are embodying or enacting innovation, Tatiana, in many ways, classic ways. Can you maybe say a few more words about innovation, what it was in the past in relation to humor, and maybe nowadays, how we talk about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's nice to think about priorities of innovation from the past and maybe into the present as well, where we place humor and entertainment kind of the center of that. And we think about staging that, putting that in the public sphere for public consumption, and allowing both the producers and then also the consumers to enjoy that innovation and to direct what that innovation is. And that's very much what I feel was happening in antiquity with the ancient stage.
Perfect. I mean, you couldn't have timed it better. We're almost at the second at the clock. Thanks so much again, Tatiana, for coming on, being our guest, talking to us a bit about your area of studies. And Anna-Sophie, thanks so much for co-hosting. To the listeners, please stay tuned. There's more episodes coming up. And yeah, thanks so much to the guests. And over to you, Anna-Sophie and Tatiana. Any last parting words, if you'd like?
Come and check out Tatiana online.
Thank you so much, Ben. Thanks, Anna-Sophie. It's been a real pleasure to work with you again. It's nice to feel these collaborations across disciplines and to have these interesting conversations. So thanks very, very much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.